Alan, Phil, we've been talking about some of the determinants or correlations or causes of anxiety, and I know one of the areas that you have addressed is not just social, but also the physiological or environmental circumstances or familial circumstances that might precipitate or be setups for anxiety. Could you share a sketch of what those are?
Sure, it's a great question. We know that anxiety is physiological in the sense that people who are kind of chronically, clinically anxious will have different levels of neurotransmitters in their brain, so serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine. Those are measurable differences within people who are chronically anxious. So there's a physiological component to anxiety in many cases. There's also environmental components that interact with physiological components, and there are questions about which comes first. Is it the physiology that affects the environment or allows one to be affected by the environment, or do you start with environmental influences that impact physiology? And I think it's both and. My own view is that it's both and. But knowing that is important because when you're thinking about treating anxiety, there may be a medical component that's necessary. But most people who work clinically will say that's rarely sufficient, so that you need not only to address the physiology of anxiety, but also the environmental factors, the familial context, the school, the congregation, the peer group, whatever else is influencing that. And so I think knowing that also impacts the way we think about parenting, because anxiety tends to run in families, like depression runs in families or other mental illness runs in families. And so it's often the case that a kid who is anxious, if you explore that, his or her parent or parents may be struggling with anxiety too, and so it becomes a family experience as opposed to just identifying one person in the family who is struggling or who is the quote-unquote problem or the identified patient or whatever descriptor we might use for that.
Yeah, so I'll just add a couple things on the environmental side. A lot of my research in the past has been around the Great Recession and its impact on communities in America, and they found interesting connections. They weren't necessarily causation, but connections between things like renting, not earning income from dividends, and rates of anxiety in an urban setting. And they've even found that in an experiment of kind of raising the minimum wage in a city, there were lower rates of anxiety and depression after that experience. And so it just raises that question, how much on the environmental side, if people could not have those conversations about the mortgage around the dinner table, if they're struggling with getting evicted or something like that, if they could have more resources, in what ways would kind of social justice work as a preventer for anxiety? And then maybe to what extent is it helpful to name some of those factors and how they're pressing in on people, as well as that might just be one further step in kind of externalizing or bringing out into the open some of the environmental factors that play a role in the development of anxiety or build on someone's pre-existing anxiety as well.